Hey there everybody, welcome back. You're watching the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage and its mechanic who thinks, I'm talking about myself in the third person, I think I may have figured something out that has taken me months. And I want to share that all with you because I'm curious to see if any of you have ever even seen this. And what this is not the machines that you see in front of you, because I want to talk about machine bed dimensions and how many there are. What are you looking at right now? On the right, you see a circa 1958 Singer 503 Slantomatic sewing machine, what modern fans today, contemporary people, call the Rocketeer. And you see it on the right, and you are seeing it in a table that I got it in when I procured this machine. To the left of it, you are seeing the back side of a Japanese-made zigzag and multi-stitch capable sewing machine. Now, I'm not trying to be clever here. There's a reason why you're seeing the front of one machine and the back side of another. And it has taken me months to, I started really being confused by it. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to let it percolate. I'm going to let it percolate in the back of my brain somewhere while I do other things. And so I'm going to show you why, and look very closely, everyone. Look extra close, not only at both machines, but look at the one on the left. There's something about it that's odd or unusual. And I believe it is the solution or the answer to a mystery that I've had ever since I got this machine. So I need to give you all some context here. When I was able to get the Singer on the right, it came in a table that was built after the machine was. You know, as I've mentioned in the past, sewing machines and their tables and accessories have strange journeys through from the time they're produced. They get into the hands of their first owner, and then they get into second, third owners, and they get swapped and bought and traded. And so you can't always assume that the table and the accessories that are with the machine, or even the carry case, if they're all original, right? That you get what you get. Now, sometimes it's potluck, and you just have to see what the owner has. But other times you get a lovely vintage mint collection of everything. And I've shown examples of that as well. So the machine on the left is, and I'll show you, you'll see the front of it. But right now you're looking at the back for a reason. Okay? I'm going to talk about Singer dimensions. Now let me go ahead and I'll go ahead and swivel the machine around. I want you to see what it is, because some of you are thinking, oh gosh, turn it around, I want to see what it is. If you've ever looked at an advertisement for a sewing machine for sale and they show you the back, it probably has driven you crazy like it has for me. So what is this machine? The machine you see here is called a Simpsons machine. Now, for those of you in the United States and other parts of the world, Simpsons, you may or may not recognize, what is a brand. It's a house brand, because Simpsons was a retail department store chain in Canada. And eventually you would see Simpsons and Sears Canada, Sears as in Sears Roebuck, the once mighty American retailer, and it would say Sears Simpsons, right? But before then you have Simpsons and you have a machine. Well, what is this machine? This machine is curious to me because I think I cannot remember if I've had a machine like this or I've seen them. I've seen American versions under the name Montgomery Ward, and I've also seen other branding put on this machine. And what's interesting about it, and let's get the camera a little closer for you guys, and we'll talk a little bit about the machine. The Rocketeer, the Singer, I've shared information on in many other videos. But we are going to talk about its bed dimensions. So here you see a machine, of course, and I'll do a separate video on this in terms of inspecting it, because it has sat for a very long time. And I was able to get this from the daughter of I believe it was her mother's machine. Her mother bought it new sometime in the 1960s or so. And what is interesting about this machine is you see this line here where the paint color changes? That's solid, okay? So we got cast iron, and then an opening here. There's an opening on the side, and so I will be exploring how to wake this machine up. This machine hasn't been used in a long time, and when I pick it up, there are a couple of Kenmores that are as heavy, but I swear to you, this must weigh the same as 2 bowling balls. Yes, most vintage sewing machines are made of cast iron, not the Singer Slant-O-Matic. It has an aluminum body and was more costly to produce for that reason. But cast iron is not unusual in vintage machines. And some of the FOFs are extra heavy, but my goodness, I mean, I have to use both hands and squat to pick this thing up if it's on the floor. It's that heavy. I can do it. I'm relatively strong, but if you ever go to pick up one of these, be ready to use some oomph when you grab a hold of it. Now, the thing about this machine is it has an opening and it has 2 knobs, and this machine, by the way, also has a hidden center, and there's a place for a cam, and a set of cams came with this machine. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Okay, so I want to remind all of you, and you've heard me say on quite a few occasions, that many competitors to the Singer company, when they wanted to get business, especially from the many people who own Singer sewing machines, they didn't ask the customer to reinvent the wheel when it came to the dimensions for a carry case, and that would have been standard, or a sewing machine table. Now, when I got this machine, it was very unusual because the owner was very nice, very friendly. The owner said, "I'm keeping the table, but we can do a deal with the machine." I thought, usually it's the other way around. People don't want the table, so it was confusing. And I have to share with you that the table, because I saw it, because I had to take this machine out of the table. They wouldn't sell it with the table for whatever reason. And that table was very similar to the one that the Singer is in. Okay, so this table with laminate is maybe just within a few years of, I'm guessing this table is probably early 70s, and this machine is somewhere in the 60s, mid to late 60s, something like that. And so could be early to mid 60s. The point is, the original table for this machine was very similar to the one that the Singer 503 is sitting in. Well, I know that 503 did not come new in this table, because in 1958, sewing tables didn't look like this. We would need about another 10 years or so. All right, so back to the mystery. You say, all right, so far, so good. All right, I'm going to remind all of you about one of the things that competitors did, as I was starting to say before I got off on a rambling tangent, which I am known to do. Okay, do any of you remember the classic dimensions of a Singer sewing machine from the long decades of what I call the vintage era? And this does not include the Singer 99 or the Singer 185. They are 3/4 machines. But all of the full-size Singer sewing machines, what did they have? They had and have a 7-inch, come here, they have a depth of 7 inches, and they have a width of 14 and 3/4 inches. That is the classic definition of the Singer footprint, right? The dimensions of the bed, which are very crucial because they determine the size of the tray if you have a carry case, or the opening in a sewing table. Now, okay, so far so good. Remember, and I've also shared in a number of videos, that when Singer came out with their Slant-O-Matic series, especially the 400 and 500 series, one of which you see right before you here, remember, this is when Singer added a second dimension to their sewing machines. All of their newer models came out with, yes, the same 7-inch depth that they had before. However, the width had increased to 16.5 inches, right? So that's about 3/4 of an inch expanded. They got wider. But remember, Singer was very clever. They didn't ask everyone to go out and buy another table. That would have been very wasteful, unsustainable. And even though in those days people weren't thinking so much sustainability as they weren't going to spend that money. Singer knew this. They were brilliant at making things compatible and backward compatible. So if you bought this machine, this Singer, with a Singer table, it would have come with an opening 16.5 inches wide. But if you needed to get, say, one of the Singer sewing machines that was still in production, even in the late 50s, they were still making a lot of their older models, even some of the dedicated straight stitch models. Why? Well, they had more than recovered their cost of setting up the factories years before, and people still wanted them. People were very tradition bound. You know, in 1958, you would have had people who could have been, say, you know, born in 1890, the year 1900, and they were still sewing. And they were, you know, like, no, I don't want any of this fancy stuff. I want what I want. I want my classic black Singer. And Singer was producing those machines, and those machines, of course, still had what? They had 14.75-inch width openings in their tables. So, of course, Singer, being clever, created the rest. Once they introduced these slantomatics with the wider base, the wider deck, the flat floor of the machine here. I'm getting tongue-tied. So once they did this, what did they do? Well, they made all of the openings in their tables this wide. But of course, and many of you know this, you may have seen what Singer did to make up for that, right? So I'm going to show you. So what you're looking at is an older table. This is a table that I bought a sewing machine, and it was from an estate sale. It's a gorgeous, oh my God, it's a gorgeous, I think it's black walnut, incredible shape, from the family of the original owner. Now, many of you have seen Singer tables that have openings, and they have this big plate, nice, thick, heavy cast iron plate, and of course, it fills in the space, right? So you can put a traditional, right? You can do a 14.75-inch wide Singer, which, you know, if you measure, there you go. It's 14.75 inches wide. And then if you include the plate, what is it? It's 16.5. So that is essentially what Singer was doing. And it was very smart. This way, you could buy one of their older design machines, and you could also get one of their newer designs. Now, there's another dimension that's important, folks, and it is the dimension or the distance between the hinge pins. Okay, so I'll show this to you again. You're in a better position to see what I was showing you. So here's the traditional 14.75-inch width. The depth is fine, because remember, they didn't change the depth when they went from the classic standard width of the 14.75. And then look here, when you see the plate, you guys see that? It comes right to 16.5 inches. So if this cabinet, or a cabinet that Singer had produced, was going to hold the something like that 1958 Slantomatic 503, this plate wouldn't be here. It would just simply fill in the entire area. Okay? Now, so far so good. But don't forget also, the width or the distance between the two hinge pins is extremely important. Okay? So that is 9.75 inches between hinge pin to hinge pin. That really matters, because what Singer would do is they would keep the holes in the back of their sewing machine. Remember, there are holes underneath the back beds of almost every vintage sewing machine. Okay, not the Singer 301, it's a little different. And of course the featherweight. They were specifically designed to be very portable, even though you could install them in tables. But the vast majority of all of Singer's models would have consistent distance between the hinge pins. So if you had a traditional classic Singer dimension, the hinge pins would line up. And what about the newer ones, the nice 16.5-inch wide, the new giant width models? Their hinge pins were lined up the same. This again, I know this, you might say, well, yeah, it should be obvious. When it comes to marketing and product design, never assume that the manufacturers know what they're doing. And if you've ever bought anything that you thought, who designed this? Well, Singer did not have that problem. So this is what I wanted to show you, and remember that distance between the hinge pins, right? So at 9 3/4 inches. Okay. Now, this is what I was looking at, thinking about all of these things to help me figure out what was going on with this Japanese Simpsons machine. Okay, so you may be thinking, okay, well, what's the deal? You know, this Simpsons has the classic, yes, you've heard me jabber on about this many times. You got 14 3/4 by 7, yeah, and it's designed to go in a Singer cabinet. But this machine has something else. It's the first time I have ever seen this in over 12 years of this hobby. Remember, I suggested when you were looking at this machine, right? I'm going to drop the camera down just a bit. Look very closely. Do any of you notice anything odd or unusual? Lower it down just a little bit more. Scoot back. Do you notice anything strange? I did, and I had literally never seen this. Now, I'm going to show you what I believe, and everyone, please tell me if you have a different theory. Maybe you've seen this before, and you can say, "Hey, sewing machine guy, you know what you're talking about." So, don't be afraid to tell me if that's the case. And I know some of you are not. So that's wonderful. Thank you. All right. So, remember, there is a steel bar. This is actually not wood. It's not plastic. It's steel, and it goes from here all the way over to here. And I thought, well, how do I get this? What is this thing, and why is it on here? Can any of you guess why? Now, I've told all of you in many of the videos, here's your clue, that after Singer, what manufacturer was the largest seller of sewing machines? And moreover, who was the largest producer of sewing machines after the Singer Company? Do any of you know? It was the White Sewing Machine Corporation. Again, white is the name of the company, not the colors of the machine. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the color white. The name White Sewing Machines. It was part of a giant corporation headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio. And they made all of the machines under their name. They made some of the machines under the domestic name that they would purchase and own. And it was kind of more of a value brand. They were beautifully made, but just priced a little lower than the White brand. All right. So, the Simpsons company went to a manufacturer in Japan and said, we have a problem. You see, we want to sell sewing machines to consumers who are either Singer and or White Sewing Machine brand loyalists. How can we do that? Because remember, the White company, for decades and decades, they would eventually change this when you get to the 60s and 70s. But for decades, the White company had its own set of dimensions, right? Because they didn't want Singer machines in their tables. They wanted White machines, and they could do this. The other companies, the European companies could not do this. All of these brands that were made in Japan, they really couldn't do that. But White had the power to take on Singer enough to say, no, we got our own dimension, thank you. And they could do this, remember, in addition to the White being a very large brand with dealers all around North America. I think they were in other countries as well. Remember, White had the contract for decades. They were contracted to make all or most all of Sears Kenmore sewing machines. And that was a huge brand. You've heard me talk many times about how big Sears was in the sewing world. They were big in a lot of things, but including sewing machines. So, Simpsons, and this is my theory. I've not read this. I haven't looked at it. I don't know where I'd find it, to be honest. But I have a theory. The buyers for the department store Simpsons said, wouldn't it be neat if we could figure out a way that our sewing machine would mount in either a white dimension or a Singer sewing machine dimension, table, and maybe even possibly cases. Now, in order to test my theory, I have to go back and look at the dimensions that the White Company had for decades, I mean generations. You will also see this dimension in many of the Kenmore models for decades that White made for Sears. Now, this does not include things like the 158 1941, when we get into those lovely multi-stitch machines that Sears sold, that you've seen many of those on my channel, including the one that gave up its life for salvage parts. Those 70s machines have a different installation setup altogether. And I'll have to go back and look at those. But the classic White dimension, and under the name Kenmore and all the other companies that White made machines for, their dimension was 16 5/8 inch in width, right, from side to side, and the depth was 7 3/8 inches. Okay. Another way to note that, if you're not sure, let's say you see a sewing table and you don't really know what goes in it. If you see the opening in the table with the dimensions I just listed for you, and all the corners are square, they're at 90-degree angles, that typically, I can't guarantee you, but it's pretty good odds that it fits White and or Kenmore's. Many of the Kenmore rotaries, for example, will fit that table. And their hinge pins will line up accordingly, right? So, what was that last dimension that I was just telling you before? What do we need? We need to know, what are the dimensions of the pins? Right, look at that. That is exactly 9.5 inches in width. Those are the dimensions that the White Company, and along with the many Kenmores they produced, those were the dimensions of the hinge pins. Now the hinge pins, and I've explained to you all how the hinges work. The hinges are mounted into the table, but you really never want to remove the hinge because the pins actually, they go into holes that are typically in the rear deck side of the sewing machine, right? And they're threaded. Excuse me, they're not threaded. They are open for the pins to go into, and then underneath are holes that are threaded for the set screws. You've seen me talk about those screws and how important they are to keep your sewing machine in your table, because your table hangs by those two screws or bolts. Okay, so if this is the dimension of a White or earlier Kenmore machine for the pins, that's not the dimension for the Singer, right? Because I told all of you that the Singer pins were 9 3/4. Well, how does this work? How does it all square? We're going to find out. I kept looking at this thing thinking, okay, I see the holes for the pins for the hinge. Again, they're not for a Singer, they're for a White, and yet the bed of the machine is ready for a standard Singer opening. This was just driving me nuts. I'm like, what is going on here? And then, of course, I see these. These are the set screws, right? These are the screws that you tighten once the pins from the hinge are inside to keep your machine from falling to the floor, right? Just like you see on other sewing machines. But they're here. They're in this big steel rail, and I thought, okay, wait a minute. Well, how did this rail get attached to the machine? And I'm thinking, well, what could that possibly be? All right, take a look, everyone. I'll grab my screwdriver here to point, because I'm holding this thing, and I swear this is one of the heaviest sewing machines I've ever seen. Okay, so you see the bolts, well, the screws, whatever word you prefer here. This is to hold the hinge pins into the frame, this frame, for putting it into a White or Kenmore table. But there's another set of screws here. And I just measured with the tape measure 9 3/4 inches, and they line up perfectly. I have never ever seen any sewing machine that is compatible with both Singer and the White Sewing Machine Company's dimensions. Again, once we get into the 60s and 70s, White would, would throw up the white flag, and sorry, bad pun, and they would adopt many of Singer's dimensions. But they were fiercely competitive. So you have essentially, let me hold it over here. You basically have the option to put the hinge pins of a White or Kenmore table here, because that's perfectly sized, or you can line it up with a classic Singer table, and it will, but then wait a minute. How are you going to put the Singer hinge pins here, because there's this big steel bolt blocking it? And I'm thinking, what did they do? Did they weld this thing? No. What helped me finally, you all tell me if I'm way out in the weeds here. I think what helped me finally figure out how this steel bar, which is very substantial, how it comes off. Remember, when I've shown you all in the past, the Singer 301, this magnificent design, was designed to be able, most of them were sold in those lovely grass cloth trapezoid cases, like a little satchel. But they could be put in a Singer table, but the Singer 301 doesn't have any hinge pinholes whatsoever. But there's a tray that goes into a table that is designed with openings for hinge pins. And it sits in the table, and then you put the 301 in and out very quickly. It was like, you pull back this little spring-loaded lever, and away you go. And that was because of that. You might think, what's that got to do with this machine? It helped me realize that there are exceptions. Even when you think every time a machine is going to do the same thing. And this is why I'm so excited about it, because I don't see this very often. And how ironic that it would be in this machine. So I thought, well, how would I remove this? So my theory is this, folks. I think that this steel bar, I have not removed it yet. I'm trying this, because if I'm wrong, I'm going to be wrong live in this video, and you all can have a good laugh. I mean, I'll probably laugh with you. Okay, so these bolts, right? If these bolts are here for the Singer, is there any deductive reasoning or logic that tells you there should be a hole in the back decking of this sewing machine that lines up with this one and this one? I mean, is that right? What did I say the other day in one of the videos that Sherlock Holmes famously said? Once you eliminate the impossible, even the improbable is possible. I think something like that. Okay, so here we go, guys. You're seeing me. I'm experimenting here. I promise you I have not done this. I like to be serendipitous. Is that the right choice of words? When I'm doing some of this stuff, because if I am wrong, I want you to see me be wrong, because I want you to all to remember it's okay if you make a mistake. And this little wimpy screwdriver, it ain't cutting it. I'm going to need my screwdriver bit set. Okay, so I had the ratchet out here. These bolts that are set up for a White or a Kenmore table are movable. These others, I couldn't get it to move with that other screwdriver. So they may never have been budged since someday, over a half century ago, it left a Japanese plant. All right, let's try this. All right, let's see what we're doing. Oh, okay, it moved. It just needed a good strong turn. Now, I've loosened it. I'm not taking it all the way out yet, because I'm going to loosen these. I'm going to loosen the other one, and then I've got to set the machine down, and I'm going to have to turn these bolts by hand. Ugh. And the reason for that is I don't want this steel bar to fall on right on my wrist. That would not be a good time. All right. Okay. Well, here goes nothing. Whoa, look at that. It just started to move. Let's see. Let's pull our cam back. I want to make sure you see the whole piece. Make sure we get the whole piece in the frame here. There we go. All right. So I'm all right. How am I going to do this? I gotta finagle something here. All right. I'm going to turn this with my hand. I don't necessarily need to take these bolts all the way out. Normally I don't. I just loosen them, because it's easy to lose them if you do that. Now I've got to switch hands here, and They're hard. This one's a little hard to get to be honest. I'm going to have to. Okay, that one's getting really loose. Let's see. Whoa, easy. Let's see if I can. Yep, there it comes. Look at that. Oh, well, I do not have to suffer the arrows of embarrassment. I had a theory, and it is right. I swear I have never seen this. I've never seen a video. I've never seen a blog, and I have never seen a machine with this. Look at this. Somebody was really clever, and they went to all the trouble to say, we want this setup to work in both ways. And this piece of steel is substantial, and it has to be. Remember, if this was made of aluminum or a thin level of steel, it wouldn't hold this machine. This machine is god-awful heavy. So, now, there's one last thing we can do. We now know, of course, again, and I'll show you again just to make sure I'm not hallucinating here. 14.5 inches wide, classic Singer dimension, and from pin to pin, it is 9 3/4 of an inch. No, it's 9 and it's 9 3/4 inch from pin to pin, maybe a 1/16 of an inch less than that. So those are the classic Singer designs. Now, what about these holes? Are they set up for Singer pins? Well, there's a good way to check that, folks, because I happen to have, I have a surplus. I don't know how this happens and how these come to me, but I have a surplus, a couple of these Singer, and I know this went to a Singer because other companies use these pins sometimes. This is a Singer hinge pin. Is this hole sized to use it? It sure is. It went in, right? Because when this goes in, when the hinge pin goes in, you don't see, let me kind of show this to you all and it'll make more sense to you. When you, there's nothing more exciting than talking about vintage sewing machine table hinge pins. Oh yes. Okay, so you see the pin is round, right? But underneath, there's a recessed spot. You guys see that? Right. That recessed spot is where that securing bolt gets tightened to, right? Now I have seen pins. Some of the Japanese machines would just have a round pin and the bolt would just have to kind of squeeze on the round pin. But Singer, of course, being Singer and being very detailed, once upon a time, they have this nice little recessed area. Let me pull this up and maybe you'll be able to see it better. You guys see that? There's a little notch cut out there. So that, of course, will face down. So the pin goes in. No, not there. Right there. So the pin goes in, right? Give a little, see if we can do a little close up here and might help us out here. Here we go. All right. So there's the pin. It goes in all the way like that. Okay. Only, of course, the hinge should be in the table, right? And you just have to put the pin in the bed of the machine. So, isn't it funny or ironic, at least to me, that a Simpsons department store, Japanese-made machine from the 1960s. I've seen many machines from department stores. You all have seen me talk about them on this channel many times. But, isn't it kind of, I just think it's ironic, everyone, because I would have thought, oh, okay, if I'm going to have something really unusual that I've never seen before, and it has happened before, maybe that would be on one of the European machines or some very unusual esoteric thing, but it's a Japanese-made, right? It's got the Singer 15 class system with the flip-up plate. Many of you have machines like this, and it has zigzag, it has needle position, even has a built-in button holder. God help me. We will see. And you can lower the feed docks and so forth. This machine, again, I believe it is similar to a machine model that was made for Montgomery Ward. And I'll have to look to see who made this. It says, for those of you who have an interest, Model N like North, 250-B like Bravo, and it has a serial number, and it says JA5 something. So again, there are so many machines from this time period like this, but I've never seen this setup before. And for those of you, if any of you have ever seen anything like this, please share it there in the comments and let me know. Was Simpsons the only company who said to the manufacturer, hey, we want to have our machines fit both the big brands' tables because we want to sell sewing machines? And so, obviously, sewing machines and all the things that went with sewing machines had to have been a huge profit center for retailers once upon a time, because sometimes, the whole half of a floor of a store in a Sears store could be dedicated to just sewing. That's how lucrative it once was. And all the other department stores wanted a piece of the action, and Simpsons said, well, hey, we've got to have a Simpsons machine. And again, there are machines. I've seen machines named after the Eatons department store, which was one of the largest in Canadian history. It is gone. Hudson's Bay, which is just recently gone, they had them. And almost every department store in the United States had their own private labeled machines. And, they got really heavy into it, because Singer was such a big competitor. They would really increase the number of these department store brands would really increase in the 50s and 60s. There's this, there's a baby boom, there's a big housing boom, lots of World War II generation folks are getting married, and they're raising their family of baby boomers, and so there was a huge demand, and every department store wanted a piece of the action. So this, it's a first, everyone. After over 12 years of the hobby and over 10 years now of having this channel, I've never seen this before. And when I got this machine, I saw this piece of steel and I thought, because I didn't know what to do with it. I had other machines. I have, a lot of people are asking me for certain machines, Singer 201s or Pfaffs or Neckies or what have you. And, unless someone grew up, maybe it was their first machine when they got married, or maybe their mom or their grandparents had one. Japanese sewing machines, I have to pay for all these machines, but this machine will not sell for as much as a Singer 201. Not because it's inferior, it's just, that's the market. But you know what else? There's one thing about this machine, and the last time I saw this was on that black Singer Spartan machine that I did an overhaul on and did videos on. What could this machine from, say, the early to mid 60s, I won't say mid 60s, 66, 67, what could this possibly have in common with a simple black Singer Spartan machine from 1950? If any of you know, please put it down there in the comments, because all I'll tell you is it's extremely rare for me to ever come across a sewing machine that has what the Spartan had and what this machine appears to have. Thank you all for watching. You have made it through 38 minutes and plus and counting, and I just really wanted to do this this video and not just talk about this bizarre, this funky steel bar, but also to talk to you more again about the bed dimensions. They're so important in the vintage sewing machine world, and it directly relates to this bar because that's what the bar was about. And like I say, this machine has sat. It is sat in a storage area I have for machines that I have not overhauled. But finally, it's having its day in the sun, and it should, right? I mean, why not? So, if this has been useful to you, or at least entertaining, please consider donating to my channel here to support my efforts to purchase more machines and tables to get them saved before they get tossed into God knows where. Every video on my channel and my homepage of the channel has a link called Buy Me a Coffee. And when you click on it, it will take you straight and directly to my Buy Me a Coffee page. And you'll know it because it has that same lovely two-tone Singer 301 that you see here on YouTube. It's the first machine I ever overhauled. Anyway, there's an opportunity for you to donate, and it would really help support me in the efforts to save these incredible incredible machines and then bring them here onto the channel to talk about them and hopefully demonstrate restoration techniques. Every machine I get always has something different and unique that it needs to wake up. And so for generations more, hopefully. Thank you all for watching. We're going to see you next time, and I will be talking more about, well, there's never a dull moment in the garage because I always have some machine that has some problem that has led people to abandon it. And I don't like abandoned machines. So I think you all can tell. Thank you all for watching and supporting the channel, and I'll see you next time.